Hello, welcome to the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services informational webinar on the 2024 Public Safety Answering Point, or PSAP Operations Grant Program, as well as the 2024 Statewide Interoperable Communications Grant Formula, or SICG-Formula program. The purpose of this webinar is to explain the updates to the applications and the updates that need to be made to applications that have been previously submitted in this funding cycle. To begin, we will have some opening remarks from Mark Balistreri, the Director of the Office of Interoperable and Emergency Communications.
Good morning or good afternoon, whichever applies. I am Mark Balistreri, Director of the Office of Interoperable and Emergency Communications at the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. I would like to welcome you to the 2024 PSAP and SIG informational webinar. As you know, the PSAP and SIG requests for applications were due on June 12, 2024. A technical guide was provided in the RFA this year, and after internal review of the submitted applications, it has become apparent that most counties either did not submit the mandated documentation, provided documentation that was inconsistent with their application, or provided documentation that was insufficient to corroborate their application. To be fair and equitable about the information that is going to be given, the purpose of this webinar is to provide further guidance on data and documentation that must be submitted. It is imperative that we receive accurate and verifiable information for the proper distribution of the grant dollars. Discrepancies found have caused a delay in announcing the funding awards. After reviewing this webinar, you will need to follow these steps to receive grant funding. You will need to resubmit your 2024 PSAP and 2024 SIG grant applications with all the mandated documentation, verifying that the information that you are submitting is complete and accurate. Failure to follow the instructions provided in the RFA and signature of the attestation form may result in disqualification of your application and your funding. If you have questions after watching this webinar, you are encouraged to submit your questions in writing to grant.info@dhses.ny.gov. These questions will be posted along with answers on the website. The question and answer period will be from September 27th, 2024 to October 11th, 2024, and all applications are due by November 1st, 2024. Thank you.
To begin, we will get started with the informational webinar for the 2024 Public Safety Answering Point, or PSAP Grant Program. Who needs to view this presentation? We would like any and all individuals who are involved in, contribute to, or complete the corresponding application for the PSAP grant for the county submitting the application. This means anyone who is involved in the grant process for anything involving the PSAP grant should be viewing this presentation. A little bit of background on the fiscal year 2024 PSAP funding overview. New York State has allocated $10 million towards the Public Safety Answering Point, or PSAP grant. It is a formula-based grant based on 58 counties, with the 5 counties in New York City being counted as one. New York State budget allocation for PSAP has remained the same from last year. Every county, with New York City's 5 counties counting as one applicant, will receive a portion of funding based on a set formula. Only one application per county will be accepted. For the PSAP grant, local collaboration is required. There is only one application per county, meaning counties must coordinate with other PSAPs within their county in order to complete the application in its entirety. Every county and New York City will receive a portion of funding based on set formula components. The objective of this grant is to facilitate PSAP consolidation and movement towards implementations of Next Generation 911, or NG 911. Application resubmissions are due on November 1st, 2024. Resubmissions will be accepted via email. In this year's PSAP Operations RFA, there were some major changes. The following items were removed as permissible: telephone equipment upgrades, CAD upgrade or replacements. The following was added as allowable: computer equipment, for example, PCs, monitors, and computer accessories, as well as dispatch chairs. The following was added as a mandatory requirement. Supporting documentation is required for questions 29 through 34, as detailed in 2024 PSAP Technical Guide. Failure to supply supporting documentation may affect final award and ability to execute a final contract. PSAP grant priority areas. Facilitate PSAP consolidation. Develop multi-jurisdictional PSAP compatibility throughout the state. Support regional initiatives as it relates to 911 operations. Implementation of Next Generation 911 or NG 911. Support the improvement of operations of public safety communications. PSAP application evaluation criteria. The Tier 1 criteria. Completion of the attestation document is an agreement that the county will follow and comply with all rules, requirements, policies, and procedures outlined within this RFA document. The county application may be immediately disqualified without further review and may not be considered for an award if the attestation document is not submitted with the application. All applications need to be filled out in their entirety and completely and leave no blanks. Failure to provide supporting documentation may automatically disqualify your county from Tier 1 consideration. This may affect your county's final award and ability to execute a final contract. Tier 2 criteria. Applications that pass initial review will proceed to the formula-driven funding based on the following factors. Elements included in the formula: county population, land area of the county crime index, and PSAP call volume. Supporting documentation is required to verify your answers and may automatically disqualify your county from Tier 2 consideration. This may affect your county's final award and ability to execute a final contract. We included this chart just to illustrate the administrative process and the evolution cycle of the grant. So first we receive the applications and we process them, then all that data is compiled, then we verify all that information that was submitted and we calculate the awards. Finally, we get the approval of the awards and the announcements, and we can send out award letters and start the budget processes with the counties. Types of PSAPs. A primary PSAP is defined by the Federal Communication Commission, or the FCC, as a PSAP to which 911 calls are routed directly from the 911 control office, such as a selective router of a 911 tandem. A secondary PSAP is defined by the FCC as a PSAP to which 911 calls are transferred from a primary PSAP. Call classification and class of service codes. Regardless of if a PSAP utilizes classes of service, emergency incoming, metrics, etc., each PSAP listed on an application must ensure their documentation shows how it calculated each call type listed in lines 29 to 34. Attached is the 2024 PSAP Technical Guide, Appendix 1. Class of service codes and call classification. This document defines which category each classification of service, or COS, should be used for calculations in most scenarios. Each applicant should check, recalculate, and recheck their applications to ensure their answer both aligns with the documentation they are providing and this document. This is a document that we developed after receiving the first round of applications to ensure consistency across the state, as it is a formula-based grant. With that being said, counting. Each call must be counted as it comes into the individual PSAP that it was originally received in. If the call was transferred to another PSAP for call handling purposes, it would not be counted in the other PSAP it was transferred to as a call handled. This is to eliminate any double counting. Do not double count. Each call is only received first at one PSAP and therefore should only be reported one time. All calls need to be categorized appropriately to the following categories: wire line, which aligns with line 29, wireless, which aligns with line 30, other, including voice over internet protocol or VoIP, which aligns with line 31, multi-line telephone system or MLTS, which aligns with line 32, text to 911, which aligns with line 33, or 10-digit calls, which aligns with line 34. Please see on the 2024 PSAP Technical Guide Appendix 1 for further details on how to define calls to ensure calls are not being double counted. For questions on line 29 through line 34, please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated for each question for each PSAP. Line 29, wireline calls received via 911. Provide the annual incoming number of wireline calls directly received via 911 from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. For each column, place the number of directly received 911 wireline calls within the corresponding column on your application worksheet. Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. So let's look at an example for line 29. So line 29 is asking about the wireline calls directly received via 911. In this fictional county, there are only two PSAPs. Our PSAP 1 received 1,500 calls, while our PSAP 2 received 2,500 calls. So I would put 1,500 and 2,500 on the application. My provided documentation would show that PSAP 1 would have 1,500 calls, and my documentation that I might have had to get from PSAP 2, since it's not a county PSAP, would show 2,500 calls. In the event that I needed to calculate any of my numbers, I would have referred to the Technical Guides Appendix, where it discusses classes of service and how to calculate our numbers, if applicable, and I would ensure that I showed my work and properly displayed how I got to my answer. Line 30, wireless calls received via 911. Please provide the annual incoming number of wireless calls directly received via 911 from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. For each column, place the number of directly received 911 wireless calls within the corresponding column on your application worksheet. Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. Let's look at the example below. Line 30 is asking about the number of wireless calls directly received via 911. I have two PSAPs still in this fictional county. PSAP 1 is the only PSAP in my county that receives wireless 911 calls, and they received 9,000 wireless 911 calls. They might have transferred them to another PSAP, but no other PSAP in this county received wireless 911 calls. Therefore, I indicate the lack of 911 calls received via wireless with a 0. In the event that I needed to calculate any of my numbers, I would have referred to my Technical Guides Appendix, where it discusses classes of service. If applicable, I would have ensured that I calculated everything correctly and carefully illustrated my work and how I got to my answer. Line 31, Voice over Internet Protocol or VoIP calls received via 911. Provide the annual incoming number of other calls, including VoIP calls, directly received via 911 from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. For each column, place the number of directly received 911 other, including VoIP, calls within the corresponding column on your application worksheet. Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. Let's look at the example below. So this question is asking about the number of other calls received, including VoIP. We're using the same example where I have two PSAPs, PSAP 1, which received 2,800 other calls, including VoIP, and PSAP 2, which received 200. Therefore, I would ensure my documentation from PSAP 1 would say 2,800 calls, and my documentation, which I had to reach out to PSAP 2 to get, since they are not a county PSAP, says 200. In the event that I needed to calculate any of my numbers, I would refer to the Technical Guides Appendix, where it discusses classes of service, if applicable, and I would ensure that I showed how I calculated my numbers and ensure that I calculated my numbers accurately. Line 32, Multi-Line Telephone System, or MLTS, calls received via 911. Provide the annual incoming number of MLTS calls directly received via 911 from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. For each column, place the number of directly received 911 MLTS calls within the corresponding column on your application worksheet. This is a change to ensure other type calls are not being double counted. Please see Appendix 1 for further clarification. Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. So let's look at the example below. So while the question does say other calls, as it says above, we have changed this question to not include other type calls. Instead, it should only include MLTS calls directly received via 911. So again, we have two PSAPs. We have PSAP 1, which has received 380, and we have PSAP 2, which has received 180. Each PSAP will have documentation supporting their answers, and I may have had to reach out to PSAP 2, as it is not a county PSAP. But my county PSAP documentation should reflect 380, and PSAP 2 documentation should reflect 180. In the event that I needed to calculate any of my numbers, I would first refer to the Technical Guides Appendix, which discusses classes of service, if applicable. Otherwise, I would ensure that I calculated my numbers accurately and showed my work. Line 33, text to 911, calls received via 911. Provide the annual incoming number of text to 911 conversations directly received from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. For each column, place the number of directly received text to 911 conversations within the corresponding column on your application worksheet. Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. Let's look at the example below. So this example is looking to understand the number of text to 911 calls directly received via 911. So my first PSAP receives 120 text to 911 conversations. These are not individual text messages back and forth with one person. These are text to 911 conversations. So I spoke to 120 individuals. In PSAP 2, they do not receive text to 911, therefore I had to put a 0. I did not leave it blank, I left a 0 in its place. Therefore, I would only have documentation for PSAP 1, as they're the only ones that receive text to 911. Line 34, 10-digit calls received. Provide the annual incoming number of 10-digit number line calls directly received via published 10-digit number from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. For each column, place the number of directly received on 10-digit number lines within the corresponding column on your application worksheet. Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. Let's look at the example below. In this one, we're looking at 10-digit number line calls. For PSAP 1, they've received 2,300 calls. PSAP 2 has received 1,508 calls. Therefore, each would have documentation that reflected these numbers. PSAP 2, though, is not a county PSAP. Therefore, I may have to reach out to PSAP 2 in order to get their documentation. In the event that I had to calculate any of these numbers, I would ensure that I reference the Technical Guides, Appendix 1, which discusses classes of service, as there are some that fall under 10-digit number lines, if it was applicable in this situation. Otherwise, I would ensure that I showed my calculations in their entirety and could clearly illustrate how I got to my answer. Public Safety Answering Point Grant, Final Takeaways. Resubmitted applications with supporting documentation and attestation with completed checklist are due on November 1st, 2024. Updated submissions must be made via email. Please read all RFA, instructional/technical guides, and application cells completely before filling in an answer. Submit all requested documentation or calculations/showing of work that led you to the submitted answer. Failure to provide supporting documentation may automatically disqualify your county from consideration. This may affect your county's final award and ability to execute a final contract. Questions? Questions regarding the 2024 Public Safety Answering Point Operation Grant Program should be directed towards the following email address: grant.info@dhses.ny.gov. To the degree possible, each inquiry should cite name and section of the documentation to which it refers. Updates and frequently asked questions will be posted online at the link on the screen. Now we will move over to the informational webinar for the 2024 Statewide Interoperable Communications Grant Formula, or SICG-Formula program. Who needs to view this presentation? Any and all individuals who are involved in, contribute to, or complete the corresponding application for the SICG-Formula grant for the county submitting the application. This means anyone that is involved in the grant process for anything involving the Statewide Interoperable Communications Grant should be viewing this presentation. For a fiscal year 2024 SICG funding overview, the New York State budget has allocated $45 million, which has remained the same since last fiscal year. Every county, with New York City's 5 counties counting as one applicant, will receive a portion of funding based on a set formula. Only one application per county will be accepted. This year's statewide interoperable communications grant goals included the development and coordination of national interoperability channels, as well as state, regional, tribal, and local mutual aid channels, development of interoperable communications infrastructure, development of governance and standard operating procedures, or SOPs, development of an inventory of statewide communications resources, i.e. continuous participation in communications assets survey and mapping, otherwise known as CASM, tactical interoperable communication plan, or TICP development, updates, and utilization. Application resubmissions are due on November 1st, 2024. Resubmissions will be accepted via email. This year's SICG-Formula RFA had some major changes. The following items were added as permissible. New 911 call handling equipment for exclusive use with a PSAP to include automatic location information or ALI displays or intelligent workstations and ALI controllers. CAD upgrades or replacement, including software and hardware that will perform integrated mapping functions through a CAD interface at each call taker/dispatcher position. Record management systems. SICG priority areas. Technological updates and refresh of existing LMR systems. Expanding access to interoperability channels and equipment for local and state agencies, including the build-out of systems to fill coverage and frequency gaps. Expansion of communications consortiums to better encourage and incorporate non-participating counties. Prepare systems for integration and migration to NG 911 or Next Generation 911 systems. Statewide Interoperable Communications Grant Application Evaluation Criteria. Tier 1 criteria. Completion of the attestation document, which is an agreement that the county will follow and comply with all rules, requirements, policies, and procedures outlined within this RFA document. The county application may be immediately disqualified without further review and may not be considered for an award if the attestation document is not submitted with the application. All applications need to be filled out in their entirety and completely, without leaving any blanks. Failure to provide supporting documentation may automatically disqualify your county from Tier 1 consideration. This may affect your county's final award and ability to execute a final contract. Tier 2 criteria. Applications that pass the initial review will proceed to the formula-driven funding based on the following factors. Elements included in the formula: county population, land area of the county, number of towers and monitored interop channels. Reminder, supporting documentation is required to verify your answers and may automatically disqualify your county from Tier 2 consideration. This may affect your county's final award and ability to execute a final contract. Like with the PSAP grant, the administrative process and evolution cycle for the SICG grant is quite similar. Applications are received and processed, then applications data is compiled, then the verification of information is submitted, then we calculate the awards, then there is an approval of awards and the announcements. Finally, there is award letters that are released and the start of the budget processes. For questions on line 7 through line 10, please see the following slides for detailed explanations on how to answer these questions. For the National I/O Channels tab, please note this refers to infrastructure, for example base stations, and not your mobile and portable units. As a reminder, please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated for each question. Line 7. Total of current towers. Please provide the total current quantity of towers or structures owned or leased by county for county LMR operations. Please include the quantity of structures utilized for base stations, transmitters, LMR antennas utilized for operations of county's LMR system. Do not include individual base stations which are not a part of the county's main LMR system and not connected by a backhaul. Quote unquote, under construction, towers/structures must not be included. Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. Let's take a look at an example below. So this question is asking about towers or radio sites that support your county's overall land mobile system. This does not include towers that are not a part of your county's LMR system. This indicates that there are 7 tower sites that I have in my county's land mobile radio system. For this example, I would include a picture of a map that has each tower site, its location, and how they are interconnected. Line 8. Number of users on the system. How many users other than the applicant county are on the system? Please include state agencies, authorities, other counties, and other counties' local governments such as towns and villages. Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. Let's look at an example below. This question asks about how many users outside of the county are on the system. In my example, I have 500. In my documentation, I would be sure to include documentation like Memorandums of Understanding, or MOUs. I would be sure to include documentation like printouts if necessary. Line 9. Number of national interoperability channels. How many national interoperability channels are installed or in the process of being installed on the system? Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. Let's look at an example below. So for this one, it automatically tabulates based on the information inputted with the National Interoperability Channels, Data, and Monitoring tab. Therefore, you don't actually have to enter anything for this one. So looking at mine, it automatically tabulated that I have 5 national interoperability channels installed or in the process of being installed on the system. Therefore, all I need to do is provide documentation that shows and illustrates this. I would take a picture of my console or my radio system and just present that. It must be clear and legible and show each of the 5 channels I have already said that I monitor in my PSAP or another PSAP within my county. Line 10. Number of towers or structures with national interoperability channels. How many towers or structures have national interoperability channels installed or are in the process of being installed on them? Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. Let's look at an example below. For this one, it discusses how many towers have national interoperability channels installed or are in the process of being installed. This is another question where you don't actually have to input any of the information. Like with question number 9, you just had to fill out the National Interoperability Channels and Data Monitoring tab. From there, your answer automatically populates. With this one, all you need to do is provide documentation. For mine, I have 9 structures or towers that have national interoperability channels installed or in the process of being installed. With that, I would provide a picture or a map of my tower sites indicating which towers have which channels installed on them. National Interoperability Channels, Data, and Monitoring tab. Please provide the requested documentation with your application to support how your answer was determined or calculated. We are looking to see a clear screenshot or picture of your console showing the national interoperability channels being monitored. Please ensure the text and full channel name is legible. Please see below for an example of a completed tab. How do I know if my picture is sufficient? The picture should be clearly legible, detailed, and show each I/O channel that the applicant is claiming to monitor. If there are other PSAPs that are not county-owned monitoring channels that the applicant is claiming on their application, please ensure that you have a picture to support this. As with previous grant applications, radio-related policies and/or standard operating guidelines directly related to daily operations and emergency change situations. Copies of all Memorandum of Understandings, or MOUs, with other local, county, state, and federal agencies and stakeholders that you share system access with. If you are unable to provide any of this information, or only a partial portion of this material, please explain why you are unable to do so in a detailed written explanation and attach. Statewide Interoperable Communication Grant Final Takeaways. Resubmitted applications are due November 1st, 2024. Applications must be resubmitted via email. Please read all RFA, instructional, and technical guides and application cells completely before filling in an answer. Submit all requested documentation or calculations/showing of work that led you to the submitted answer. Failure to submit all required documentation, calculations, and/or explanations may cause your application to be dismissed or cause a reduction in calculated funding. Questions. Questions regarding the 2024 Statewide Interoperable Communication Grant Program should be directed to the following email address: grant.info@dhses.ny.gov. To the degree possible, each inquiry should cite name and section of the documentation to which it refers. Updates and frequently asked questions will be posted online at the website on the screen. And this concludes the 2024 grant webinar. Thank you for watching.